He followed his father's footsteps after a slight detour to pursue the sports dream, never realizing it would lead him into self-storage. Today, on the Stories Behind the Door podcast, it's the Senior Vice President of Newmark, Appraiser Tim Ryan. Excited to be live on LinkedIn with someone who is at the forefront of all the things that are affecting self-storage. Before I get to him, I'm going to give a shout out to my sponsors at Kiwi 2 Construction. So grateful for their support of the show, allowing us to bring the amazing stories of the people in self-storage to the fore. Kiwi 2, when they say it's going to get done, it gets done. Now we are going to transition to my friend Tim Ryan. I feel comfortable calling him a friend because over his right shoulder, he's got an Orangeman plushie back there. We're definitely going to talk about the Cuse and your time there. Obviously, you're a little bit later than my time there, but that's all right. We'll get to that piece. I start the podcast the same way every time. Storage, such a niche asset, such a cool asset class, but not one people go to Syracuse to get into. So I would like to hear the journey of how Tim Ryan found himself as an appraiser in self-storage.
Yeah, it depends on where you want to start going back to, but I started
This is stories, brother. We like the early story. We like the backstory. We love that part.
So basically the Cliff's Notes are that I started appraising self-storage in 2019. I joined Newmark the year before. I was kind of doing random stuff all over New York State. I'm based out of our New York City office, and Newmark formed a national self-storage team, co-head by Chris Sani, who a lot of people know, and Steve Johnson, who a lot of people know. They speak at conferences and panels, and they have decades of experience, and they formed a national team with boots on the ground at local offices. And I was asked if I wanted to head the New York office. I basically have taken over most of the Northeast. I help out in national portfolios. So I kind of took it and ran, and 2019 was a good time to break into it, considering how crazy COVID era was. Norm Shore from William Warren calls it the steroid era of self-storage, which I was basically like hitting behind Barry Bonds, like, get benefiting from all the steroids in that era. But yeah, I became an appraiser in 2011. I worked in the radio industry after graduating from our beloved Syracuse University, and it was a tough time in the financial world, and just tough time to really find your footing. So my dad was an MAI appraiser, and he was getting up there in years, and thought it'd be mutually beneficial to say, hey, maybe I'll kind of teach you the industry, and you can kind of start slowing down. And certainly always feels good to kind of teach somebody your wares and show them the ropes. And that it led to some very good years working with him, and I ended up kind of branching on my own in Newmark.
I love that. I spent from 2017 till 2021 when I got into storage running a business with my dad. So I appreciate that amazingly. And that relationship also allowed me to have the ability to get into the self-storage world eventually. So nothing better than family. That's an awesome, awesome story. We're going to talk about the steroid era of storage for sure. I got it in 2021. I was a little after you. I didn't get quite as much of the advantage of it, but still an amazing time. And we'll talk about that. I'm going to rewind to the journey to Syracuse. What led you to Syracuse? Why'd you want to go up there? And what were you pursuing while you were there?
So always just a massive sports fan. Grew up rooting for a lot of bad New York sports teams, but really, really enjoyed it, watching football every Sunday, and NBA, you name it, college sports. And I don't know, I just got in the habit of watching all these games, watching Marv Albert. I read Marv Albert's book. He published it in the mid-90s. It was called I'd Love To, But I Have a Game, which basically is, I can't make Thanksgiving, I can't make Christmas, I can't make all this because I got a game to call. Which that, really appealed to me, having sports basically be your entire life. And I just got into the sports broadcasting industry, and our local municipality in New Jersey had a local access station that aired high school football, basketball, baseball. I called gymnastics and softball and wrestling, everything that they aired. I was the broadcaster, and I was told I was pretty good at it. So that led me to Syracuse University, which is the preeminent place where these broadcasters, find their footing, the Marv Alberts and Dick Stocktons and Bob Costas and all of them. And
I
when I
was a
got there, I
Sean
found out
McDonough guy.
yeah, exactly. And when I got there, I found out there's a lot of people out there just like me. I was not a sports broadcasting unicorn for sure. So
I
yeah,
laugh. I tell people when I went to Syracuse, I had dreams of, and this, I went in 96, 97. I went for my master's degree, not
mhm.
undergrad like you, but had dreams of a six-figure salary when I graduated, and my first job paid me $6 an hour, and I was doing news instead of sports because that's all I could get. So the dream sometimes is a little more challenging than you think. Obviously, you decided that the time was, you were working at, you had, did a little background, ABC in New York City, doing radio production, got out of that, went to work with your dad, which is awesome. Take me through the steps from being a residential appraiser and then eventually getting into commercial real estate.
Yeah, I was never actually a residential appraiser. I was always strictly commercial. My dad in the 80s and 90s, he was in the old Wild West days of appraisal before FIREA in the mid 80s, where you basically were handing in 20-page appraisal reports. They could have been written on a cocktail napkin now. And then he grew up, then he progressed through, FIREA and all that. He was appraising malls all over the country. He was Cushing and Wakefield's mall appraiser. He would travel. We had a lot of family vacations as a kid that were, he had to go inspect this mall in St. Louis or Minneapolis, or did a lot of trips to California because he had a lot of work out there. Um, so yeah, he was doing that. And by the time I got involved, he was mainly focused on New York City, uh, smaller type commercial work, shopping centers, apartment buildings, those kind of things. So he kind of showed me the ropes on that. And it was, a lot of volume. The banks were doing well. He had good relationships with a lot of banks and shopping center landlords, and you know fed me a lot of work to get my feet wet, and it worked out really well.
I love that. So now we're gonna go to 2019 and getting into storage. How's it different from any other commercial asset class? Is it different from any other asset class? What did Tim Ryan have to learn to kind of get into the self storage industry?
Yeah, there's certainly a jargon and you know just how a self-storage facility operates, which is different than a lot of others. It's kind of like a combination of different asset classes. You got kind of the trade area segmentation of a retail property, and just you have sort of the branding flagging component of a hotel, and then you have the leases, which are kind of similar to apartments. They're basically micro apartments for your stuff. So that kind of that's kind of how it was like branded to me when I first started. I did a lot of apartments, so it was kind of like a natural, I know how to do retail, I know how to do apartments, I know how to do a lot of different components of real estate. So it seemed like it was something that would be able to learn. Um, so yeah.
You hop in 2019.
Mhm.
Obviously, a lot of new product coming on the market in 17, 18,
Yeah.
19 as self-storage is gaining velocity. We go into 2020 pre-COVID. People are a little nervous because things are not leasing up very fast with that oversaturation. Then all of a sudden COVID comes. How challenging was it as an appraiser when we saw these massive rate spikes in a very short period of time to make sure that you're putting the right number on a facility?
It's interesting. Like, I look at some of the reports that we sent out back then. Like, we've just done refinances or updates of properties we may have appraised in, early 21 or mid 21 or late 20. And we look at the cap rates we put on and the rent growth rates. And it's like, it seems, kind of crazy in hindsight. But as appraisers, we're supposed to mimic market activity. We're, as an appraisal, we're doing market value, which is a buyer and a seller on that date of the as is value. That building was to sell, what the value is going to be. And your assumptions are supposed to be market based. And at that time, everybody was going crazy. No one was saying like, whoa, 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 let's slow down a little bit here. No one was saying that. Everyone was going crazy. Everyone was buying. Everyone wanted a sub 5 cap rate on their building. And, that's what the investors were telling us. So it was difficult. It was just such an unusual time. Kind of it's the mirror image of kind of where things, which I'm sure we'll get into, of the low asking rate environment after the interest rate spike, where you know the buildings are coming out much higher than you expect back in 21. And then in 23, you're dealing with, shortfalls and you know, not hitting the projected income because the market was telling us, that it's not worth this much or the rent shouldn't be growing this much. So kind of a similar problem, but different sides of the coin.
Yeah, and interesting how quickly that flipped, right? In a
Yeah.
matter of 2 years, you go from this place where, if you come in low, the buyer and the seller are annoyed with you for coming in low. And then you go fast forward 2 years, and all of a sudden it's the exact opposite problem. How do you, as an appraiser, stay true to what it is you think in a given moment, despite, obviously you're going to get pressure from people that want to make sure that what they think their property is worth is what the appraisal comes in at?
Yeah, it's all about having a foundation of solid data, whether that's your database of rental information, your investor surveys. We have a national investor survey, and we just talk to people in the market. You need a solid leg to stand on when you're in one of these debates with a borrower or with a lender. Um, so once you feel like you have that, then the lender's ultimately going to decide who they're going to rely on. We typically do bank work. The lenders hire us, so they may rely on our expertise. They may go against us, which is fine. We have to balance that out. We need relationships with the borrowers. We need relationships with the lenders, and ultimately we also just need to use our judgment. Judgment can take decades of appraisal work. You may have encountered the problem 3 years ago, and this is how it went that time. So you kind of factor that in. Yeah, so it just takes a lot of that, and it can be difficult. Obviously that's you kind of want to be in an environment where everything's going well and rates are going up, but that's just not reality. This is a cyclical industry, so there's going to be your down periods too, and you have to be ready to deliver bad news as well.
You just gave me about three questions that I want to ask. Two of them I'm going to put out there. You talked about data. So we're going to go down the data road
Hmm.
because of the challenge right now of what's going on with street rates and web rates. And I want to pick your brain a little bit about how you work around that. The other side of it is we saw this tremendous spike, right? In 21, 22, 18 months. I think you were at the investment forum with me in 2023 when NA REIT gave the closing speech. And it was like a 63% spike in the value of the REITs because of that incredible spike in rates. Well, of course, they're naturally, in hindsight, I say of course because nobody thought this in 2023 before the rate hike, but they started coming back down. How do you, as an appraiser, kind of work through 23, 24 as we saw this dip in rates, of maybe forecasting some of that? How are you dealing with that? What was the steepest decline we'd ever seen in storage and rates?
Yeah, it's a two-pronged thing that we have to do. First of all, we have to put out there like what this environment is. We need to fully show the scope. We have in all our reports now, we have a multi-page section that our brokerage team put together of just the reality of how far asking rates dipped and the nature of the asking rent environment. So we lay that out there like this is the environment. Okay, let's go to our specific property. What's the situation? Is it in lease up? Is it a stabilized property? Is it a market that's really undersupplied, kind of a unicorn, so they can charge really big rents? Or is it an area that has four properties and lease up in the trade area? So our actual rents are low, our asking rents are low, and they're not going to come up for quite a while. So we have to lay that out. And we also supplement that with comparables that either we've appraised or say we're appraising a property that's a third party managed by Extra Space or Public. The borrower can get us information on comparable properties that may be slightly outside the trade area, but they're actual in place stabilized rental rates that show we're projecting the 10 by 10 climate control to be 250 a square foot. Here's five comparables in the area that's what customers are actually paying. So our numbers make sense. It may be well above the asking rate, but as we explained, the asking rates are pretty much meaningless in a lot of markets, especially back in 23 and 24.
It just, the third quarter REIT earnings reports came out, and it was so interesting to see that the way that street rates particularly, especially Extra Space, just way below achieved rates now when they were above achieved rates previous to the pandemic happening. And so I was interested, and you sort of answered my data question there. You opened up another question. Obviously, you're going to lean on those REITs that have a presence in the area to give you those comparable rates. How important is it to have those relationships to be able to get access to that data?
For sure, yeah. We our appraisal reports have nothing to stand on if we don't have the data. And self storage is. It took me a little while to discover this. Like with any other property type, it's oh, you just go into CoStar. There's all these leases. There's all this data. And I asked our guys who run the team, like, where do I go? They're like, well, there's this. They're trying to build this up, and there's just no consistent platform for it. So our best data is the properties that we've appraised. You can't knock on a door of the, public storage down the road and say, what are your customers actually paying? They're not going to tell you. And you can
Right.
try to call and get through the maze of the call center employee that's been given a script of what to say, and you get shot down pretty quickly if you just say the one wrong thing. It's tough. The secret shopper environment is tough, and when you have the actual data from properties you've appraised, it's the best data you can get. So that's why we have a national team of 25 or so appraisers, and we do a lot of portfolios that allow us to make our data even stronger.
How many appraisals are you guys doing it? And I guess I'll break this down this way, because a portfolio can have 20, 30 different
Yep.
sites in it. You guys have an idea of roughly how many assets you're underwriting in a given year?
Oh, it has to be in the thousands. I've probably myself appraised about 200 or so. Yeah, I
Yeah,
cover
I mean, there's
cover the Northeast, and I also help out national portfolios as well in other markets where needed. So, and
so you guys are really
they can be anything from 20-story high rises in Manhattan to you know a 4,000 square foot facility in upstate New York. A few drive up buildings on the side of the road, Class A to Class C. We do everything. Anything that needs financing or needs an appraisal or needs a feasibility study, a market rent study, you name it. We're there. We can do it.
I'm interested in those numbers. There's roughly, I tracked IQ, God bless them. They partner with me on my other podcast, the Self Storage Report, and Noah Starr, who, by the way, his life mission is to get that data available to everybody. That's literally what drives him every morning, is to find a way, like in the hotel space, where you can go in and you just know what the achieved
Mhm.
rates are, which has worked very well in the hotel space. Hasn't We haven't even gotten close to clearing that hurdle in storage yet, but I know we'll get there if anyone's gonna. So we'll give him that. He talks about that transparency and that how important that transparency is going to become. What I think is fascinating on your end of it, if Tim Ryan's doing 200, even if the other 24 appraisers at Newmark are doing half of you, you guys are cycling almost all of the 70. That's where I brought up Noah Starr, 70,000 self storage facilities in the country. You guys are cycling through those. I mean,
Mhm.
you're touching a significant percentage of that in a 5 or 6 year period. That's a ton of data that you guys have access to.
Absolutely. Yeah. We have our expense comp database and ancillary income database, which is all from properties we've appraised. We work with Mini Storage Messenger, like the expense guidebook. That's, through a lot of it is our data. Um, and we use those relationships that we have to do the best investor surveys. Like we need, especially in this ever changing environment, we need the best information. And that just makes our appraisals easier and smoother knowing that you have data to back this up. You don't have to give a paragraph of fluff saying why you think the rent is what it should be. And, some lenders, some intended users that might stand up to, but a lot of lenders would be like, I need actual numbers. Needs to make sense. Especially with these banks have a lot of bad money on their books. They need safe, solid, reliable loans, and you need that they hire us to put a product out there that hey, this loan's going to work or this loan isn't going to work, and that's what we do.
I'm interested to go down this road because there's been a lot of talk in the industry. Are we going to see a bloodbath come down the pike as we get to these 5 year balloon payments on different projects that, we're getting 2%, 3% debt on them in 2021, 22? you're obviously seeing these and doing these appraisals for the bank as these projects are coming back around. We're not really quite there yet. Like we're coming up on the balloon of 2020s. Are you seeing things that are vastly underperforming what it pro forma might have looked like in 1920 come back around and be challenged in any way?
I haven't seen a lot of that. It's interesting. I'm actually starting to see some facilities that we looked at 2 or 3 years ago that are actually performing well. The New York metro area hasn't been hit as much by, the asking rent ECR environment, because this is, you know, one of the more, if not the most undersupplied market in the country.
Yeah.
You'll have, you'll actually have trade areas where there's only one facility in a 3 mile radius. There's parts of New York City where there's only one facility in a half-mile radius, which sounds absurd, but it's actually true. And the legislation in 2020 that self storage developers cannot get ICAP tax benefits really was a huge shift. And it's funny how that coincided with the steroid era. In New York, it was a mega steroid era because you weren't going to have as many forecast facilities coming down the pipeline. We're still dealing with some new supply of properties that got their papers in order to get that ICAP benefit, but really not a lot, especially.
Do me a favor and talk people through the ICAP benefit and what taking that away did for somebody who isn't involved in it
Oh,
as
sure.
much as you and I.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, it's a 15 or 25-year tax benefit. Um, it ramps down toward the end of the benefit, but in areas where you have to pay exorbitantly high amount for land or to convert a building, uh, it's really just not going, especially with the asking rents environments the way they are now. It's not really going to be cost feasible to develop without that tax benefit. Most of the new development we're seeing in New York City is Manhattan because you can get the rents to justify the high cost of
And we're not
the
talking
land.
about saving $20,000-$30,000 a year in
No,
taxes. I mean, in those New York City, even the boroughs facilities, I mean, you're talking hundreds of thousands,
hundreds of
even
thousands of
millions of
dollars.
dollars
Yep.
a year that you're saving in taxes that now no longer is available to those developers.
Oh yeah, and we value the benefits of these tax. We value the present value of the savings. These tax benefits, they're valued at multiple millions of dollars on a facility that's worth $80 million or $100 million. Like it's a huge component, and without that, things may not be feasible. I know of at the time of the that was announced. I know of a few developers that were building in New York City, and they're like, we're out. Like
Yeah.
this is the death knell.
I mean, simple math, $1 million of NOI at a
Yep.
five cap, and it's $20 million off the value of your property. That changes the economics pretty drastically, pretty quickly.
For sure, yeah, it makes it very difficult to build. The city is just before that, in I believe 2017. There's industrial zones throughout the city called IBZ that they did not allow self storage development in. So it can be pretty tough to develop. And this is the biggest city in the country, and it's very hard to build new storage there. And the
That's why
population is
Manhattan
growing.
Mini Storage is getting $60 a square foot on their portfolio in New York City, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, that's not a terrible deal. I want to kind of stay on the tax thing, but I obviously was up at the October NISA event with you up in Westchester, and you were on the panel and talking about the incredible impact that insurance is having
Hmm.
on facilities as well. So the two kind of big things that have been affecting expenses in the self-storage space, obviously property taxes, but then we've got insurance. You've seen some pretty drastic changes in what people are dealing with in their insurance costs on properties as well.
Yeah, no doubt. I would say insurance is over like a 2 3 year period. Insurance has really doubled. Whereas it might have been like 20 to 25 cents a square foot, maybe even like getting down toward 15 if it's like a really big facility. You know, double that number. That's what it's going to be. And these are actual premiums. Actual T12 expense statements that we're getting these from. And yeah, and it's I've been appraising a couple of properties in New Jersey recently, and they've been hit with the mansion tax legislation. There were some utilities legislations which have brought those expenses up as well in that area, and the cost of sale for the mansion tax. So you really have to stay vigilant with expenses. And thankfully, the self-storage industry isn't as hard hit as, say, like multifamily in New York City, where you have rent stabilized apartment buildings in the city that just aren't generating any kind of value because the expenses keep going higher and higher and higher, and the rents aren't going up. At least a self-storage facility with the right revenue management plan in place can offset, that higher expense
Right.
load. But you do need to, we do need real, real sound budgets and T12s to accurately show the expenses. That help makes our job easier and will make sure we're not undervaluing or overvaluing the facility.
Sales the last couple of years in the market, it's been a little slow, right?
For
Development
sure.
has slowed down drastically, but especially acquisition transactions, the CO market virtually disappeared
Hmm.
overnight. And even fully economically stabilized acquisitions were down pretty markedly, late 23, 24, 25. You're on the front edge of this.
Yeah.
What are you seeing as we start coming to the close of 2025 on the transaction market?
Yeah, I've been definitely seeing a pickup second half of 25. I From 22 to 24, we appraised very few transactions in the Northeast area. And even nationally, just those huge portfolios weren't really, aside from the Extra Space Life Storage merger, there weren't really the
One
Syracuse
$13 billion deal.
there weren't these properties that were trading as appraisers that made our job very difficult. I actually spoke at a NYSSA investment forum in January of 23, I believe, and they had, believe it or not, 3 appraisers up there. Who would want to hear from 3 appraisers, right? But basically asking like, how do you do your job? Nothing is selling. And yeah, we're all like, yeah, it stinks. We don't have sales deliverables.
I
We're
remember that. I was in that crowd
yep,
listening.
yeah. It's like, yeah, it's very tough to do our jobs. But now things are getting easier as we're actually seeing an active market. The bid ask spread has really come down. Uh, the rate cuts have certainly helped guide people toward maybe this is the time to sell. I'm seeing facilities in lease up that are selling. I'm seeing stabilized facilities that are selling. Uh, the C of O sales aren't quite there yet that I've seen, but certainly we're seeing a more active market, which just helps everybody, helps us, and it's we have things to actually talk about as opposed to the last couple of years at these conferences where it just be like, yeah, I think estimate rates are going to finally start to drop next year, and then they don't drop. I think they're going to start to they go next year. Nope. I think sales are going to start flowing next year. Nope. So I think the next time we'll actually have, yes, we'll see actual transactions happening.
A last question I'm going to ask you, and something I've been keeping a close eye on is the consolidation of what's going on in this industry. Even when I got in 2021, everyone always said this is a mom and pop industry still. There's a ton of mom and pop, mom and pop, mom and pop. I'd hear mom and pop ad nauseum. Again, something that you're sort of on the forefront of. How much more now are you seeing things that are being sold that are not mom and pop, but especially the consolidation of who the buyers are? Are you seeing a smaller number of people doing the majority of the transactions?
Yeah, I'm definitely seeing that, especially um, this is these are all everything that I touch is either primary or secondary markets. It's pretty rare that I do stuff in the tertiary, really, really low class C kind of markets. These are really sophisticated markets. Um, the mom and pops are really, really targeted as potential acquisitions. And you're seeing, you know, a select pool of, 8 to 10 or so operators and REITs really targeting those kind of facilities to buy. So yeah, I'm definitely seeing that. It's a growing trend as this industry gets more and more specialized and more difficult to navigate with moratoriums, the barriers to entry, um, the the REITs coming into all these markets and bringing down the asking rates. It requires a level of sophistication that the mom and pop operators sometimes don't have.
Tim Ryan, cannot thank you enough for coming and spending some time on the Stories Behind the Door podcast. Last thing I want to ask you, somebody wants to get a hold of you, they need an appraisal. I know a lot of your work is through the banks, but if somebody's watching and they want Newmark and Tim Ryan to come out and help them out, what's the easiest way for them to get a hold of you?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. My email, tim.ryan@nmrk.com. We do feasibility studies, appraisals, market studies, market rent studies. you just want to pick our brain on, hey, I'm looking at this site. Do you have any data? We're happy to help. We're boots on the ground in this industry, and we're trying to help anybody out that needs it. This is a great industry. I've loved attending these conferences and meeting folks like yourself. Um, it's we love having numbers and stuff like that, but actually meeting people, putting faces to names, and you'll hear stuff that a lot of people don't get to hear. And just learning the jargon in the industry. It's been great for me in the 6 years I've been appraising self storage to get that information.
Could not agree with you more. A far cry from what life was like in a TV newsroom in my younger days. So really, really happy to be in this asset class. So excited to get to hear Tim Ryan's story and really get to understand the depth of knowledge you have in this space. You guys can reach him. If you can't get a hold of him for whatever reason, get a hold of me and I'll get you in touch with him very easily. He's Tim Ryan. I'm going to give a last shout out to my friends at Kiwi 2 Construction, Wayne Woosley and his crew, 35 plus years of building steel buildings in the self-storage, small bay flex, boat and RV, you name it, they will hook you up with your steel structures. You can reach out to them at kiwiconstruction.com. He's Tim Ryan, Senior Vice President of Newmark, an appraiser extraordinaire. I am Thaddeus Campbell, and that is it for this week's episode of the Stories Behind the Door podcast. Join us next week.